I'm in partnership with the zoo and Bank of America. This couldn't happen without them. So I'm very grateful for this. You're going to hear a fabulous speaker, and Karen Carr is representing the zoo, and I asked her to do all the introductions. And if you need programs for the rest of the year, we have some out there that are updated. It seems that we keep on adding program upon program. Anyway, have a good day. And don't be afraid, we're going to have a good dialogue.
Good afternoon. We are so excited to have you here with us. Special thanks to Dale and the Coudert Institute, to all of you for enabling speakers like James Currie to happen, and for us to be able to talk about, think about, and consider such amazing topics that affect our blue planet. Thanks to Bank of America for their sponsorship. Without them, as Dale said, this would not be possible. So I want to introduce you to an amazing man who has spent his life devoted to conservation and wildlife. He was born in Cape Town, South Africa, and by the age of 8, he was a birder. Can you imagine? He came upon this interest because he worked at the Table Mountain National Park where his parents worked. And so as a child, he was exposed to nature and to wildlife. I love that because that's our mission too as a zoo, that we connect people to nature, to wildlife. And it has an impact, just like it has an impact on James. So James, after that, has done numerous amazing things. He has been a speaker. He has done several wildlife shows for places like Discovery Channel, National Geographic Wild, NBC Sports. I got that one right. Yeah. And he has an upcoming show, which is in Guyana, and it's called A Wild Connection. James also works for the Great Plains Conservation, which is one of Africa's leading travel groups, because James loves to connect people with wildlife. And so, if you would join me in welcoming James Currie to the stage. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit more about myself, because some of you might not be too familiar with the terms birding, for example. And as a young boy, I got really interested in birds and fell in love with the natural world because, as Karen mentioned, my parents they worked at a place called Kirstenbosch National Botanical Gardens in a place called Cape Town, South Africa. Has anybody been to South Africa here? Yeah? A couple of you. Okay. It's absolutely stunning. And if you find yourself in our beautiful country at some stage, please make a visit to the eastern slopes of Table Mountain and those beautiful botanical gardens, because they're really special. And it was there that, as a young boy, I used to climb up the mountain face at the age of 8 or 9 and go up there and just enjoy nature before the throngs of tourists would come in and visit the botanical gardens. So I had this entire mountainside to myself as a 9-year-old boy. And much to my mother's horror, I used to go up a path that was ominously called Skeleton Gorge. And as a 9-year-old boy, of course, there's nothing more alluring than the name Skeleton Gorge. And so I used to head up Skeleton Gorge most mornings and go and sit on the rocky outcrops and look out across the beautiful Cape Flats from my elevated position. And there would be these, we call them rock Hyraxes or dassies, and they're actually very closely related to elephants. Elephants and rock Hyraxes are the closest living relatives if you go all the way back, but they're tiny. They're about this big and they look like little rodents. They don't look like they could be related to elephants at all. And I was sitting there one morning in the early morning sun and watching these dassies basking in the early morning light. And from my concealed position, it was just magical because I was watching probably 10 or 12 of them moving around, sunbathing. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shape fly in. And immediately I already knew my birds, and this was a black eagle. And it didn't see me because I was hidden behind this rock. And all the dassies, one of them sounded the alarm call, and they all ran for cover and tried to get into the little crevices in the rocks, except for one rather portly dassie that managed to get stuck, and this black eagle came in and grabbed him. And I remember seeing this happen from me to the table away. And I saw it sink its talons in and grab this dassie off the rock face. And I thought as a 9-year-old boy, this is something that I want to chase for the rest of my life. And so, I'm going to take you to a beautiful part of southern Africa for my first little story. And this is a place called Mahango Game Reserve. It's a place situated in a strip of land right at the top of Namibia called the Currie Strip. And it's basically sandwiched between Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Angola. So a crazy piece of land. And it was a piece of land that was very hotly contested during the civil wars in South Africa, the border wars, during the end of apartheid when we got to the 1970s, 1980s. There was a lot of fighting on South Africa's borders, and that particular Currie Strip area was one of the most hotly contested because it was sandwiched between all 5 of those countries. And after the war, it was actually handed over to Namibia. And at this time in my life, we're going back to the very early 2000s. In fact, it was probably 2000. And I had a little bird tourism company in South Africa called Honey Guide South Africa. And I was guiding trips all the way from Cape Town to the Okavango Delta, which is right at the top there next to Mahango, by vehicle, all the way through Namibia, into the Kalahari, all the way up into the Currie Strip, into Botswana, and then back again. It was a 6-week excursion, and we would often find 500 species of birds on this particular trip. And I had a British guest who was called Harold, and he was an astute twitcher. And he'd spent a lot of his life in Africa. And so he'd actually seen more birds in Africa than I had, and I was his guide. And I'd done several trips with Harold before, and he said to me, I want to book you for a private trip all the way to the Okavango and back. And the one bird that I really want to see is this bird. It's called the Wattled Crane. It was the one bird he hadn't seen in Africa. There are probably only about 7,000 pairs of wattled cranes left in the world. They're the largest cranes in Africa, really, really beautiful. And I knew just the place to show him this bird, which was Mahango Game Reserve. Now, in the early 2000s, late 1990s, Mahango was still very infrequently visited. And we'd taken this long trip from Cape Town all the way up, and I got to the reserve entrance. It was about 8:30 in the morning, and I checked into the little ranger station. There was nobody there, just a little visitor's book, and I paged through it. The last people that had been in the park were 4 days ago. So we knew we had the whole park to ourselves, drove in through the gate, and made our way to this magnificent floodplain. These birds are marsh birds. They like to be on these floodplains. We made our way to this magnificent floodplain where I knew that wattled cranes liked to associate. We got there, and I parked in the parking lot, and there's quite a lot of thick forested area between the sort of the road and where you go down onto the floodplain. And I parked the car, and I said to Harold, you just wait in the car. I'm going to go down quickly and see if the cranes are there, and then I'm going to come back and get you if I happen to see any. And he went and jolly good in his British accent and said, I'll wait right here. And I got out of the car, 8:30 in the morning. It had rained the night before, and that beautiful smell of Africa after the rains permeated through my nostrils. It's a very particular smell if you've been to Africa before. It's a mixture of dirt and water and grass seeds and herbs and animal dung, all mixed together into this sweet aroma, which is very particular to Africa. I started walking down the path on the way to the floodplain, and I heard a little barred owlet call up in the tree, and I made a mental note because maybe Harold hadn't seen that one, and I was going to show it to him. Came down through the thick bush, out onto this magnificent floodplain, blinded by the light. I had nothing but my binoculars on, and right in front of me was a flock of 60 wattled cranes. And I went, yes, this is amazing. And I'm looking at them through my binoculars, and I'm about to turn around to go up the path to go and call Harold when the entire flock of 60 cranes take off. And I'm watching them through my binoculars, flying. I'm thinking they're going to land somewhere. And they fly, and eventually they disappear from sight over the horizon. I'm watching them disappear, thinking just absolutely heartbroken, because this is the one bird that Harold desperately wants to see. And I go back through my binoculars to look at where they once were. Perhaps, maybe, miraculously, one or two have remained behind. And I look through the binoculars, and I see something that stops my heart. Because padding through the dew-encrusted grass in the early morning is a large, black-maned African lion. And he's walking straight towards me. And I have nothing but a pair of trusty Nikon binoculars. And he's about 150 yards from me when he appears out of the long grass, and he starts making this ominous call. Not a full roar, but just a grunting. He's going, and I'm looking at this lion. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I know what to do. I've trained as a guide for many years in Africa. I need to walk back, but I need to face him. And so I start walking back the path, and every time that I walk back, this male lion walks forward. And every time that I stop and look at him, he stops and looks at me. And now I'm making my way up that narrow path through the thick bush again, and he's following, he's closing the gap. He's now about 120 yards from me. And my training as a guide has always told me to be aware of my surroundings, no matter what you're facing. Normally, I would have my tracker with me, who would hold me by the back of the belt. I would have a rifle, and he would guide me through the path to make sure I'm going the right way, and I'm not going to get stuck on a acacia tree or something. So I'm looking behind me to make sure that I know where I'm going. And he's coming. He's now about 100 yards from me. And I look down on the path, and I see something that stops my heart for a second time. Because over my fresh footprints from just 5 minutes earlier are the unmistakable fresh pug marks of more lions, or lionesses, to be precise. And I look at the tracks, try to ascertain where they're going, and it looks like they're going straight up the path that I came down. They've probably seen me. And I look at the pug marks again, and I notice the tiny indentations of little cubs. And it dawns on me now as this male lion is 80 yards from me, just watching me on his haunches, making this contact call, that I am trapped between a male lion and his pride of lionesses with young cubs. Now I have two choices. I can either go back out onto that floodplain, confront the big male lion, and take a long detour all the way back to the car. Or I can stay where I am on this little path, and I can try and cut my way through the bush and take a quicker route back to the car, and hopefully evade the lionesses and their cubs on the path. There's something about the determined look of that male lion, and something about facing down a 500-pound cat armed with nothing but a pair of Nikon binoculars that makes me choose the latter. And I decide to go through the thick bush off that path. And I'm going off the path, and as I take one step off the path, I've got the male lion over here, I've got the tracks heading up that way. I hear this loud but kind of low call. And it's coming from somewhere really close to me over here. And then I see some movement, and I detect the swishing of a black tail tip, and then another, and then another. Pent-up female aggression, like feline jack-in-the-boxes, waiting to pounce. And I make my way through the bush, and they're literally 10 yards from me over here. The male lion is still about 60 yards over there. And as I make my way through the bush, I feel the acacia trees cutting through my shirt, and I can feel the blood dripping down my back. And I'm pushing through that thick bush, and as I'm moving, my movements trigger a charge. And out of nowhere comes one of the female lionesses straight at me. And I shout at her in Zulu, "Hamba isifebe!" And I break her charge at the last minute. And she covers me in mud and leaves. And I can notice every crease and wrinkle in her face as she stops over there, and the spitting coming out of her mouth. Now, hamba isifebe, I won't tell you what it actually means in English. This is very rude. But swearing in Zulu sounds much better than in English. And I break her charge, and I cut through the bushes a few more times, and I can feel a stump jabbing me in the back, and I get back on track, and I'm getting caught up by the acacia trees. My entire shirt is ripped. And then the male, emboldened by the female's charge, comes running straight at me, up the path and into the thicket. And I shout at him, "Leave me alone! I'm just here for the freaking birds!" And I break his charge. He's a little shyer than the female, and he breaks off about 20 yards and goes and joins the rest of the lionesses. And I now start making my way a little bit more determined through that bush, and all 4 lions come at me this time. The entire pride of lions. And the best thing you can do as a guide when confronted by a charging lion is to run at it or them. And so it takes every ounce of my courage and every ounce of my being to run at all 4 of them, shouting, "Leave me alone, I'm here for the birds!" And they break their charge and they head back into the thick bush, growling and snarling. And eventually, I make my way back up to where the car is parked. And now it's a much more open area. I got charged 7 times. The last charge, right as I was at the vehicle, I broke that charge, got into the front seat, sat in the front seat, turned and looked at Harold, whose eyes were as wide as the saucers on your table. And he looked at me and he said, "James, the things we do for birds." And I said, "We? Where's the we in this?" And so I did this was many years after my training as a guide in Africa, but I did my training at a beautiful place in northeastern South Africa called Pinda Private Game Reserve. It's a magical, magical place. It's one of the few places in the world where you can go and dive with manta rays, whale sharks, and leatherback turtles in the morning, and go and view cheetah, elephant, leopard, and lion in the afternoon. So it's a really fantastic spot. It's where I cut my teeth as a guide in the early 1990s, and it is there that I did all my training. And once I got to this place called Pinda, I immediately took a love for birds as well as other wildlife, and I was assigned as the resident bird guide at the lodge. So if there were any guests that had a particular interest in birds, I would be the guide that would take them out. And so I'll never forget, quite soon after I finished my training, I was at the lodge one day, and the head ranger called a meeting of all the rangers, and he said, well, these guests are coming in today, these guests are coming in today, you guide these ones, you guide those ones, and James, you're going to guide a Texan guest. And of course, all the other rangers were like, no way, that's not fair, James is new, we love the Texans because they give the best tips. So in those days, as guides, we survived on tips. And if you got Texan guests, we would fight over them. Americans first, but if they were Texan Americans, whoa, that was gold. So Morty, the head ranger, said, no, he's a birder. And all the other guides would, okay, James can have him. And so we'll call him Tex. I took Tex out, and he said to me he really wanted to see this bird called a Narina trogon. It's one of the most beautiful birds in Africa, but very, very difficult to find. I said to Tex, I think I've got a great place to find this bird. It's in this patch of sand forest close to the lodge. And being in the 1990s, we didn't have iPhones and all the technology that we have today. So we had to rely on ourselves to call in a bird. And we used to actually call them because birds will respond. If you play the sound of a particular species, they'll come closer for a look, and you can generally find them like that. So I took him to this patch of sand forest. We got off the vehicle. We wandered out into the forest, and I said to him, Tex, I think I can call this Narina trogon in for you. Let's just sit here, and I'm going to make the call. The call goes something like this. So it's kind of like a hooting that ends off in a raspy call at the end. And I waited for a little bit, and sure enough, 15 or 20 seconds later, one answered from deep in the sand forest. I said, come on, Tex, let's go. And we started moving off. We got to another area where I thought, okay, now we're closer. We've halved the distance. Let's call again. And the bird answered, but now really, really close. And there was this big cathedral-like termite mound in the middle of this clearing in the sand forest. I said, Tex, come on, let's go. We walked slowly up to this termite mound, and I said, let's use it as cover. I'm going to call, and then you step out, and we'll see the bird on the other side. He said, oh, jolly good, he's behind me. I make the call one last time. Not like that. And I make the call one last time, and the bird answers, but right behind the termite mound. I'm thinking, yes, I've got this. I'm going to get a great tip. This is going to be amazing. I say, Tex, come around this side. We'll see it. And we walk around the termite mound. And there's Greg, my fellow ranger, with one of his guests. And we've just called each other in to this sighting. And I tell this story because so often those of us that have spent a lot of time in the wilds in Africa, we think we know everything. But nature's got this amazing way of bringing us right back down to size. How's the lunch? Good. So, some of you that have been to Africa and those of you that might go in the future, you'll meet your guide on a safari vehicle or on foot if he's taking you out on foot or on a kayak, whatever the case might be. And you'll look at this guy and you'll go, wow, or this girl, and you'll go, wow, you guys know so much. How did you learn all this? Well, a lot of people don't realize the training that goes into being a safari guide in Africa. It's not something where you can just study at university and then go into the middle of the African bush and now take people out. It's a very rigorous exercise. And I did my training at Pinda, as I mentioned, and it was incredibly rigorous. It was a 6-week military-style selection course to start off with. What happens is a whole bunch of people send in their resumes that want to be safari guides, and the organizers of the safari courses will then whittle those down from, 200 resumes and take 20 to go on this selection course. And the goal of the selection course, which is 6 weeks, is to try and eliminate people along the way based on knowledge, determination, safety, vehicle skills, can you shoot a rifle, all these different things that you have to do to progress at the end of that 6-week course. And so by the end of the selection course, there might be 3 or 4 rangers left that will then begin their training at the particular safari lodge. What also happens, and this is not the easiest thing to talk about, but it is a necessity at the end of your training, which can last a full year, depending on where you are, can last longer than that as well. You're required to actually shoot an animal on foot, which is, for us in the industry, terrible, because we're there because we love wildlife. The last thing I want to do, I'm anti-hunting, I don't like hunting. The last thing I want to do is go out and have to shoot an animal. But they do a test, and they make sure that you will pass that test to shoot a particular animal, because when it comes down to it, and your guest's safety is in jeopardy, you have to be able to pull that trigger. And there are, believe it or not, a lot of guides that get all the way to that final stage, but yet they can't shoot. They can't bring it within them to shoot an animal. And so we have to be able to do that. Anyway, about halfway through my course, we had this beautiful place called Nkwazi, which means knowledge. And it was a beautiful camp that overlooked a huge floodplain in northeastern South Africa at Pinda. And this is where we did all our training. We slept in little fly tents, we ate in a big mess, and then we'd go out and do our activities or our tests for the day. And on one particular day, around lunchtime, appropriately, I needed to go to the toilet. And so I head out into the toilet. Now, the toilets in the African bush, especially at the training camps, are very rudimentary. It's just basically a structure with wooden sticks in the ground, and it's basically a long drop, right? And it's got fly mesh up until the ceiling with like thatch. And so it's open air, but it's got like wooden slots for privacy over here. So I'm sitting on the toilet, reading a wildlife magazine, and I hear everybody starting to get ready for lunch. And I'm about to finish my business and put the magazine down. I'll take a chair, it'll be easier. Sitting there in the heat of the day, reading the book, the magazine, and I'm about to put it down, and I see coiled up between my feet is a massive African puff adder. one of the most dangerous, in fact, the most dangerous snake in Africa. More people get bitten by puff adders than any other snake in Africa. And although you might not die from it, although people do 100% die from it, you more than likely will lose a limb. So they have an incredibly virulent cytotoxic venom, which is muscle destroying, and basically wherever it bites you, just rots off. So if you get bitten on the finger, not a train smash, because you just lose your finger. But if you get bitten on the leg, they're probably going to have to amputate your leg below the knee. And I'm thinking, as a 20-something-year-old ranger, I'm thinking, this is not what I need in my life right now. And this puff adder is particularly large. And they're very sluggish snakes, but they have the largest fangs, besides the gaboon viper, of any other snake. So think a rattlesnake with those large fangs, but even bigger than rattlesnake fangs, and the quickest strike of any snake in the world. So they'll lie there, concealed, relying on their camouflage, and then suddenly the slightest movement will trigger a bite. And I know from my training, I'm sitting there, it's about 100 degrees in this outhouse, and I know from my training that snakes are deaf. So I can hear people bustling around. I can hear my friend's voice, my tent mate. I go, Brandon, come over here. He goes, oh, what? I said, come over here, there's a snake. He goes, no, there's not. And he carries on talking. And they eventually go off to lunch. And I'm basically screaming, guys, I'm being serious. They go off to lunch, and I can hear them all starting to have lunch. And I'm sitting there starting to perspire. And I cannot move at all. And I'm watching the drops of perspiration drop onto the snake, terrified now that the snake is going to bite me. And so I call out to the whole bunch of them. I think there were about 18 or 20 of us on that course. But the terrible thing was that I've got my pants totally down. I've got no shirt on. And I know for a fact that one of our fellow rangers on the course is a beautiful young girl called Sue, whom I'm desperately in love with her. And I'm thinking, oh my God, Sue is definitely my girl. But now I'm sitting on this toilet, and I can hear them all having lunch, and I shout again, guys, there's a great big snake between my legs. Of course, that didn't go down too well, because they know that I'm on the toilet. So there's a couple of them shouting out, Currie, stop bragging, and blah, blah, blah. And eventually Brandon says to the others, he says, wow, James hasn't been back in a while. And so he calls them, but he calls all of them, including Sue. And they all now are around the toilet, and they can see the snake, and they're like, oh my God, you're in so much trouble. And they're cracking jokes, even though this is a very serious situation. And they're trying to figure out, okay, what should we do to save James? And one of the bright sparks says, okay, well, we'll give him a panga. We'll pass a panga through, cut through the netting and pass him a panga. And a panga is a machete. And they'll basically leave it to me to chop the thing's head off between my legs. And that is not going to happen, because I don't want to chop my foot off, number one. And I know that I'm not going to be able to strike it as quickly as it'll strike me. So somebody else says, okay, we're going to open the door, and we're all going to get in a chain, and you're going to slowly, slowly put out your arms, and we're going to just pull you off the long drop in your birthday suit into the open. And of course, I'm thinking, there's no ways I'm doing that with Sue around. There's absolutely no ways. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just praying for like a little rodent or a lizard or something to come out to distract the snake, and it doesn't happen. Well, I ended up sitting on this long drop. I started cramping. There was just sweat everywhere. I could almost see a pool of perspiration around the snake. It wasn't bothered. I ended up sitting there for 5.5 hours. They timed it until the snake finally decided to make its way back through a hole at the back of the toilet and disappear. And eventually I came out of the toilet, and everybody was like, yeah, by this time I'm decent. And they were like, and Brandon says to me, and everybody's like laughing and congratulating me for being alive. And Brandon says, wow, that was a mursa big puffy. which means that was a really big snake. And Sue says, seen one, seen them all. After I finished my time at Pinda, I started my own bird tourism company with a friend of mine called Richard, who was a fellow guide with me at Pinda. And that was around the same time that I took Harold up to go and see the Wattled Cranes and the lions. My wife at the time, American, from Hollywood, Florida, just down the road here. We met in Fiji while I was a guide. And Rebecca was pregnant with our first child, Gemma. And this is going back, how old is Gemma now? So this must have been around 2004, 2005. And we're living in Cape Town, South Africa. And Rebecca is 7 months pregnant. And we'd started this bird tourism company. And my friend Richard happened to be down from KwaZulu-Natal, the northern part of the country. And he was in Cape Town visiting. And we're having dinner one night, the three of us, myself, Richard, and Rebecca. And Richard's gets something on his phone that says, and this is the early days of cell phones. This is like 2005, 2006. Remember those really old things? He finds some message from somebody that says, a European redstart has been found in the Kalahari region of southern Africa. And by this time, Richard and I were avid twitchers. We would like go anywhere for a rare bird. And neither of us had seen a European redstart. And he says to me, Jimbo, which is what he calls Jimbo, should we take your little Golf and go and see this redstart tomorrow morning? And I said, I don't know, like Rebecca. And Rebecca says, no, it's fine, babe. You can go as long as you're back for dinner tomorrow. So I said, okay, no problem. And we packed up and hastily left the next morning to go and see the redstart. Now, what I neglected to tell my lovely wife was that the redstart had been found in the Kalahari Desert of Botswana. And we were here in Cape Town. And it's about a 16-hour drive to get up there. And she wanted me back for dinner the next night. So I said, no problem. We'll probably be a day late. She won't mind. So we screamed up all the way to the Kalahari Desert, got to this place called Nosib, this little rest camp, went out that evening. We drove very quickly that evening to try and see whether we could find it. Sun was just setting. We couldn't find the bird. We tried again the next morning. We couldn't find the bird. We went further into the Kalahari. Couldn't find the bird. Night falls. We stay again. We're still looking for the bird. And this is important because I've seen 798 species in southern Africa at this time. And I'm about to be one of the youngest people to crack 800 in southern Africa, a huge accolade for birders. And so I know that on the way up there, I had seen a bird called a red lark, which took me to 799. So this European redstart was going to be my 800th bird. What a cracker for your 800th bird. Anyway, we spent 3 days, and eventually I say to Richard, listen, I've got to get out of here. Like, I've got to get back. We have to leave. And so he says, okay, we'll leave, we'll pack up. And we drive through the park, and we get to the rest camp. And you know how you're out of reception for many days, and suddenly you come back in reception? We're starting to drive back to Cape Town, and my phone just goes beep, 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 beep. And I just see like 60 messages. And the first one is from my wife. She's like, hi, babe, how you doing? Hope everything's okay. Hope you found the bird. The second one is, hi, honey, just making sure you're going to be back for dinner, blah, blah, blah. The third text is, where are you? What are you up to? Why are you not home? And then the fourth one is, come to the hospital immediately. I've gone into labor. And I'm like, oh, crap. So we start gunning it. I say, Richard, just absolutely put foot, we have to get back here. So we're driving at like 140 kilometers an hour all the way back to get there. I'm trying to call her, but I cannot reach her. I call her mother, who happens to be down at the time. She answers the phone. She's livid with me, absolutely livid with me. Our relationship's never been the same ever since then. It's still really bad. And we're gunning it all the way down there. And we're about probably 8 hours out of Cape Town. And I'm absolutely panicking because I haven't spoken to her. And Richard, literally, our hands are like this, like white knuckles on the vehicle. And Richard says to me, you know what? On this road, just a little bit off the road, is a really good spot for sklaters. And I'm like, sklaters? And this is very intriguing for me because this is a bird I really want. I'm like, what do you mean? He says, yeah, they come into this cattle trough in the middle of the day. And it happened to be the middle of the day. He said, we'll just wait there and the birds will definitely come in. So we screech off the road, we drive another kilometer down this dust road, and we wait at this cattle trough. And I'm looking at my watch and I'm panicking. I'm like, these birds better come quickly. Waiting there, 10 minutes goes by, 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes. My phone's ringing, can't answer it. An hour goes by, 2 hours goes by, and eventually 2 sklaters come in and drink from this watering trough. And I'm absolutely elated. I've got my 800th bird. We're high-fiving it. We gun it all the way down to Cape Town, get to the hospital, and they managed to give my wife this injection that stopped the labor. And to cut a really, really long story short, Gemma was born 2 weeks after the due date, after everything. But I never had it in my heart to tell my wife what an absolutely stunning bird the Sclater's lark is, that made me almost miss the birth of my first child. But jokes aside, she's been with me on this journey, and I travel half the year at least, probably more than half the year, and I've had to do really good when I come home, and I had to do really good after that and buy her lots of expensive jewelry to make right on that one. I'm going to just spend the last little bit of our afternoon together telling you a little bit about my favorite creature in Africa, elephants. And those of you that may have had the privilege of spending some time with elephants may realize that there's probably not a creature on our planet that looks more different to us, but that is more similar to us. And I think that's the thing that fascinates me the most about this incredible creature. I've had the great privilege of spending many, many years of my life with these remarkable animals. And probably the best experience that I've had by far was getting to know this particular elephant before he died. In 2014, I received a photograph of this particular elephant from a friend of mine who said, "Have you ever seen anything like this?" And I couldn't believe it. My jaw literally dropped, because you don't see elephants like this anymore in Africa. They don't have tusks and ivory like this anymore. And I couldn't believe that there was still such an elephant that exists. He was one of the largest elephants in Africa at the time. He was believed to be 13 foot in height at the shoulder. 13 foot at the shoulder. So I'm 6'3". He was more than double my height at the shoulder. So you can sort of do the math. He weighed 7 tons in his prime. A really big bull elephant, to put it in perspective, weighs about 6 tons. He was 7 tons in his prime, 13 foot at the shoulder. And he had the largest set of ivory known to humankind in recent times. It's estimated that his ivory weighed somewhere between 160 and 170 pounds each. And the ivory was estimated to be about just over 10 foot in length, each tusk. His ivory was so big that when he walked, that ivory would drag on the ground, and he'd have to lift his head to keep that ivory off the ground. His name was Isilo, which means King of Kings in Zulu. And I decided I had to do a film on this particular elephant. And Discovery Channel at the time wanted me to do a series called Last Chance to See, which was basically a series on the last things on Earth that we have to see before they disappear. Think the pyramids, think the Great Barrier Reef, think the marvels of our world, and of course, large tusked elephants like Isilo. So we went out there and we filmed him. It took us a long time to actually find him, a couple of days, and remarkably, I was asleep in my tent in the rest camp. The rest camp in this huge park was totally surrounded by electrical fencing, proper fencing. And so I was pretty surprised when at like 1 o'clock in the morning, I felt something incredibly large brush up against my tent. And I opened the tent flap and I saw this elephant in the moonlight at 1 a.m. browsing from a tree right next to my tent. He was so smart, this elephant, that he knew that he wanted to get at these delectable trees in the rest camp. He knew that he couldn't get shocked. His 60 years of life had told him if he used his tusks. So what he would do is he would rest those giant tusks on the 2 electrical wires, short them out, and then he'd push the fence over and walk over into the rest camp. And he had done this numerous times, and we had no idea. And so we found Isilo, and thankfully that morning he was still there, browsing around the rest camp, and we had a wonderful few days filming this absolutely iconic elephant. And the series with Discovery, they decided to pull the plug on it, and I decided that I wanted to do a proper documentary on this elephant, and also at the same time find out if there were any others like him in Africa. And so this was the start of my journey doing my documentary called Last of the Big Tuskers, and I'll just play you a brief trailer about the film.
Africa is home to the world's largest terrestrial animal, elephant. But man is threatening the very existence of the species. Elephant with huge tusks are most prized by poachers. Chinese and Vietnamese dealers move ivory by the ton.
Customs can check less than 1% of the cargo passing through Hong Kong, and we have already seized 33 tons of ivory.
We are losing species. For what? For trinkets, for ivory bangles, for rubbish.
Anti-poaching teams find themselves in war zones, and elephant numbers keep dropping.
Over a 7-year period, Africa has lost 144,000 elephants. That's 30% decline, driven by the ivory poaching crisis.
Super tuskers, elephants with tusks estimated to weigh 100 pounds or more, are becoming almost impossible to find.
There were hundreds of 100-pounders 60, 80, 100 years ago. Why do we only have 20 to 30 now?
To find out, and to actually see some of the last big tuskers left on Earth, I travelled to Tembe and Coudert Park in South Africa, and Tsavo and Amboseli in Kenya. For the first time, scientists explain the crucial role super tuskers have in elephant genetics. And we meet some of the legends.
We've been looking for him all day, and Isilo came to us.
Gentle Isilo, aggressive Currie, the approachable Mastulel, elusive Camboyo, secretive Wantan, and formidable Tim. We see the knife edge of real human-animal conflict.
They want to kill you.
And we try to help.
We are going into the sixth extinction because of us. What a legacy. We haven't even learned their language, and we kill
So that last image in that trailer actually depicts the remains of that iconic elephant, Isilo. And after we'd spent a lot of time filming him, I flew back to the States, and it was a short time later that I got a call from one of my friends that worked at the reserve saying that they could not find Isilo. And it was really heartbreaking because my friend at the time was a guy called Tom Mahamba. He was a local Zulu ranger, and he had the best relationship with this elephant. He could literally walk out on foot, and Isilo would not tolerate close human contact. But with Tom would just speak to him. And he recognized Tom's voice, and he would calm down. No matter what, he would calm down. And Tom could walk right up to this bull elephant. It was a remarkable thing to see. And he called me and said that he'd disappeared. We offered at the time to put up a helicopter to go and fly and look for him, because this is the most iconic elephant on our planet. When I was born in 1972, there were about 1.4 million elephants in Africa. We have less than a quarter of that left. In my lifetime alone, we have only between 300 and 350,000 African elephants left. And when I started the film, there were 40 super tusker elephants, elephants with at least one tusk weighing 100 pounds or more. Today, we have no more than 20 left. That's in the space of 6 or 7 years. So this documentary was a conservation film to establish what is happening in elephant populations. And the more we started looking, the more we started finding that not only are we losing the super tusker elephants, but elephants are losing their elephantness. Entire populations of elephants are losing their tusks completely. So if you go to Queen Elizabeth Park in Uganda, the normal healthy rate of a tuskless elephant in a population is about 3% of the population. So 3 out of 100 won't have any tusks. It's human-induced evolution that is causing tusklessness in African elephants now. Queen Elizabeth National Park is now at 30% tuskless, completely tuskless elephants. Gorongosa in Mozambique is at 66% of all the elephants without any ivory whatsoever. And Addo Elephant Park in South Africa is over 90%, completely tuskless. And is this how we want elephants to be remembered? Is this how we want our children and our grandchildren to see elephants without ivory? Now, they can survive. They're incredibly intelligent creatures. But what we've essentially done as humankind is we have created an entire population, and we are fast creating an entire species that is handicapped. It's like people walking around with one arm. You can survive, but it's tough. Elephants use their tusks to dig for water, to pry the bark off trees, to lift their babies out of the mud, and to defend themselves. Countless ways that they have to use their ivory for. So when I heard about Isilo's death, I immediately raised some funds through another guy called Johan Marais to put up a helicopter and look for him. We were denied by the park authorities, and they couldn't find any trace of him for about 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, it was announced that they had found his carcass, and the largest set of ivory had disappeared forever. So that set of ivory would have fetched intact well over $1 million on the black market, and they still managed to see the tracks where the ivory had been dragged over the fence into Mozambique, and they probably ended up somewhere in the east, and today are possibly even standing at the entrance to somebody's house in the Far East. And it was a really, really trying time for me, but I went on this quest saying, how many more of these elephants can there be out there? And we found that, strangely enough, there are still pockets where these elephants exist. And the best gene pool for them is Tembe Elephant Park in northeastern South Africa, where there are now currently 2 super tusker elephants, and then the Tsavo ecosystem in Kenya, which holds the remainder. Probably, I would say, we've got about 15 in the greater Tsavo ecosystem, and then 1 or 2 in Tanzania sprinkled around. But no more than 20 of these elephants, when literally, when I was born, there were thousands. So it's been a really, really sad story. But I do want to end off with a brighter note, because through our film, when our film was released and premiered in South Africa, the chief of Tembe Elephant Park, the guy that actually owned the land, his people owned the land. It's very unusual to find local people that give land to be set aside for wildlife. Most times, local community members put a lot of pressure on their leaders to plant those areas for crops and to use it for agriculture and everything. But he's a very forward-thinking leader, and he said, no, we're setting aside this area for the elephants, because one day these elephants will be valuable to us. And he had actually given the South African government the rights to put those massive tusks of Isilo when he died at the entrance to one of our international airports, Durban International Airport. And so when Isilo disappeared, Nkosi Tembe, the chief, gave up a reward of $50,000 leading to the arrest of the people that did this. It didn't help, they disappeared. But after the release of our film, he donated a further 50,000 hectares of land to make way for these super tusker elephants. And he committed to doing it. And we have to actually build there's a big main road that goes on the edge of the path along Mozambique towards Sodwana Bay. And we will have to actually create like a passage that goes through to the newly designated park on the southern boundary. But what this means is that the greatest genetic gene pool for super tuskers in Africa is now able to flourish and move. And we've actually relocated a couple of these large bulls from Tembe now to Pinda Private Game Reserve in South Africa, where they can spread those genes and hopefully pass that large tusk gene on to those other populations. So it's a huge success story. And I want to end with a little video that gives you a little insight into just how remarkable elephants are. While I was filming these super tuskers, I was struck by, I mentioned at the outset, the similarities between us and elephants. You know, they mourn like us. That aerial shot in that video of Isilo's carcass, you'll notice there are 2 paths, one going in and one going out. It's in a very remote part of the park. Those paths are not created by people. Those paths are created by elephants. Not going to look for food, because those paths were never there before, specifically to grieve the loss of one of their icons. And those elephants, we've witnessed it, will go in there as a herd. Sometimes there'll be bulls on their own that have spent a lot of time with this elephant. They'll go there, they'll droop their heads, they'll stand, they'll pick up the bones, they'll touch them, they'll smell, and they'll all stand in a circle, just literally, not feeding, just grieving, sometimes for hours. Some of the old bulls that were his friends have been seen there for days in that area, just paying their respects to him. They go through puberty at roughly the same age as we do. They have remarkable memories like we do, in fact, better memories than we do. And we're only just starting to scratch the surface of elephant communication. There's a great survey done in 2017 or 2018 in Kenya where a group of elephants visited 2 separate tribes in Kenya, the Kamba tribe and the Maasai. And it's exactly the same elephants, but they come into contact with these 2 different groups of people. The one group are very antagonistic towards elephants because there's a lot of conflict between them and their crops. The other group live harmoniously with these elephants, and they're called the Kamba. The Maasai will generally throw spears. They want those elephants out of their areas. So these elephants come into contact with both these 2 populations. Well, they found out, remarkably, elephants can tell the difference between not just our language, but a dialect of our own language. So they played with this elephant away from people. They played the calls of Maasai women and children, and the voices, and the language, same language, different dialect between the two tribes, and the elephants would be totally relaxed. They then played the voices of women and children Kamba people, and the elephants would be totally relaxed. When they played the voices of Maasai men, the elephants would disappear into the forest. When they played the voices of Kamba men, the elephants were totally relaxed. Here we are, and I love that saying from a very famous environmental journalist in South Africa in our film. We haven't even learnt their language yet, and we kill them. So how much more will we still discover about elephants? I believe a lot, and I believe that we will learn a lot from elephants, because elephants teach us. I could go and talk on about this forever and ever, but elephants teach us how to be good fathers, how to be good husbands. I need that, right? Because what I did to my wife when she was 7 months pregnant. But we can learn a lot about elephants and their society and apply it to our own lives and become better humans as a result of looking to animals for influence and for guidance. And so I'm going to close with a little story, and it's a little video, but it's this particular bull elephant here on the right. He passed away of natural causes, I'm really pleased to say, of natural causes. His name was Tim. He was one of the most famous elephants in Kenya, in East Africa. He passed away about a year ago. But when we were filming him, we knew that he took this one particular path out of the park to go and raid crops with his askaris. And askaris are like bodyguards. They're younger bulls that learn from that older bull, and in return, they guide him and protect him with their lives sometimes. And so we knew that he followed this particular path, and I had these two really good GoPro cameras, you know, those little small GoPro cameras, and I wanted to put one down on either side of the path and get the whole herd walking past and get that perspective looking up at one of these massive tusked elephants. And so we could see the path. We knew that they came on this path every single day. They followed the same path. So we set the cameras probably about 6 feet apart so that the elephants would walk right between the two cameras. While we were filming these large tusked elephants, I started noticing some really strange behavior. In that the elephants, the bulls with the largest ivory, when they saw people, they would sometimes disappear into a thicket and hide their tusks, put their tusks inside a bush. If a plane flew over, they would do the same. Instinctively knowing, I honestly believe this. Nobody's proved it. We can't prove it. It's anthropomorphism to prove it, or putting human qualities onto animals. But I suspect I've witnessed this behavior enough, and other scientists have witnessed this behavior enough to know that old elephants know the value of their ivory to people. And they hide their tusks. And when we filmed this group of bulls, and you'll see Tim will be the second last elephant in these clips. I'm going to show you both clips side by side. Remember, these elephants are supposed to walk right between the two. And you'll see what happens, because elephants are incredibly intelligent. Incredibly intelligent. So here you'll see the bulls coming. The one in front sticks his trunk out. He immediately smells something foreign, but if you look closely, you'll see he looks straight at the camera. They walk around. He leads them, not down the path between the two cameras, but around the back of the cameras. They know they don't want to be filmed. There's Tim at the back, not following the path, but taking the new unbeaten path from one of the askaris. And then this is where the mischievousness of elephants comes into play. They know the lens faced forward, so if they go behind it, they can't be seen. And they grab both cameras. If you've ever wanted to know what the inside of an elephant's mouth looks like, there you go. And they play football with it. And literally, they carried these cameras for about at least 100 yards, chewing them, passing them on to each other. And eventually, we trail them. We want the footage. They are remarkable creatures. Thank you all very much for listening. And I don't know if you want to have time for questions.
Oh, yes.
Yes, James, thank you. Let's see if this is on. James? Well, not sure. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Does anybody have questions?
What is the life expectancy of the elephant?
So in captivity, they can live up to about 80, similar ages as ourselves. In the wild, generally 65 is considered old for an elephant. And the reason for that is elephants don't actually die of old age. They die of starvation because they have 6 sets of teeth throughout their life. And when they get into their sort of mid-50s, they're on that last set of teeth. And as that last set gets worn down, they can no longer feed on the roots and shoots of trees. So they start gradually losing condition. And that's why a lot of elephants will actually go out and die on open areas or swampy areas because the last years of their life they can eat nothing but grass because of that. So that's the reason. But in a zoo environment or in a human-controlled environment, you're able to supplement them with the vitamins that they need to live a longer life.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm in love with elephants. Anyway, I was in Africa, Kenya.
Yeah.
In Tanzania, not in South Africa. There was a study, I don't know, Peter here,
Yeah.
but they have found elephants suffer from the diseases we have because of not having enough food and all that. They have diabetes, they have other same diseases. It's extraordinary. But when I was in Nepal, I rode an elephant down in the jungle. He became my best friend. I gave him a bath. I mean, it's amazing. But I would have been scared normally, but they're phenomenal animals. And I wish we could afford one at the zoo. Other questions?
Wait a minute, sorry, I'm all the way up. How long does it usually take for them to grow and develop their tusks, the full extension?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one of the reasons why super tusker elephants have had such a decline is because a lot of hunters, trophy hunters that you speak to, will argue, well, the older the species is no longer valuable. Where it's entirely the opposite with elephants. The older an elephant gets, the more it's valued by its herd. And the more you rip into the very fabric of elephant society is when you take out the old of a species, not when you take out the young of a species. The young of a species, as tragic as it is, nobody's learning from that particular individual. But the old matriarchs and the old patriarchs in elephant society, that's where the rest of the herd is learning from. That's where they get their knowledge from. And so what's very tragic with elephants is that, contrary to popular belief, elephant bulls become more sexually active the older they become. So instead of going into must, which is a height of sort of heightened sexual activity for the bulls, where they get sort of really sexually active, they normally go into that when they're younger, maybe for, 2-3 weeks at a time. Older bulls can go into that sense, that heightened sense of must for up to 3 months. And they'll actually become more dominant, and they'll mate with the females right up until almost their deaths, more so than they will when they're younger. At the same time, elephant tusks grow exponentially the older they get. So in the latter part of their lives, those tusks, when you find a young bull at 40 and he's got tusks like that, you know he's going to be a really big bull because As he starts getting bigger, those tusks get wider and longer exponentially in the last sort of 10, 15 years of its life. So we're taking out these bulls not only when their ivory is at their biggest, but also during the time when they are going to pass on their genes successfully. And that's why we've seen a tragic decline in large tusked African elephants across the entire continent, is because of that exact reason.
Is there a lot of genetic information in the tusks? Is there any in them, or is it?
That's a really good question. So believe it or not, up until this time, nobody knows, and we're hoping that our film will be the catalyst for some university discovering this. It'll be a really good project. Who carries the gene for large ivory? Is it the bull, or is it the cow, or is it both? And if we can find that out, we can dart a bull, extract his DNA. It's a dropout dart. So you shoot it, the dart drops out, you get DNA from it. If we can sequence that DNA and know that he has the genetic disposition to have large ivory, we can now afford that young bull presidential decree, move him out of an area where perhaps he might be threatened or hunted, put him into another population where he can breed with elephants that have smaller tusks, and hopefully bring that gene back. Because as humans, we're the most ingenious species. We have the ability to turn things around when we can. We've got to turn it around before it's too late. And with 20 of these big bulls left, the time is now.
One last question.
Yes. Yes.
Can you organize a trip for us to Pinda?
Yeah, so we were just talking about, we're going to do a zoo trip actually in October of next year, and another one in 2023 as well.
To where?
We're going to do one to Kenya and then one to Botswana and South Africa. So
Are you going to be the tour guide?
maybe, if I get asked.
I'm here, I don't know.
Right, if I get asked, yeah.
Tour guide or something.
Sure. So we have exceptional guides if I'm not available, but we'll put something together for sure.
I'd like to ask you just one quick question about birding.
Sure.
I was in Central Park one day, and one tree was filled with hundreds and hundreds of birds singing this incredibly joyous song. There was not another bird in any other tree singing, only in one tree. Were they having a celebration, a marriage, what was going on?
So
I'm so curious.
yeah, so birds will generally pick the best vantage point from which to voice their proclamation to mate, right, with another bird. So they'll generally choose the highest, most visible perch in a tree, sing from that perch, and then attract females to come into the area. So yeah, you probably find that cardinals do that a lot. Our beautiful red cardinals, you'll often see them on a telephone wire or right at the top of the tree. And sometimes you can have multiple male cardinals vying for females in one tree. And it sounds like that whole tree is alive. And you're like, where? Everything else is quiet.
I don't think this was cardinals.
Yeah. No, any birds, like lots of birds do that. If there's a lot of them, like hundreds of them together, it's probably a food source. So that tree has got some kind of fruit or berry that they're all after. And birds, when they get around food, they get very excited. So they do sing joyfully. It's like, sing for your supper, right? So yeah, no, that's a good observation though, for sure.
I have a concert in my garden. It didn't happen yesterday. But last year, they started singing with the music.
Right.
And everybody, the musicians, everybody was giggling. Were you there? I don't know if you were there. But even they were on tune.
Right.
I mean, they just heard the chorus.
Right.
It's wonderful.
It's amazing. I mean, even, we're talking about elephants earlier, but elephants and music. Elephants absolutely love music, especially classical music. There's certain individuals that have been, somebody plays classical music to them, and elephants will just totally chill out. They love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah.
I often talk to birds. I repeat the pattern of what they're saying, and they repeat it back to me.
Yeah.
Back and forth.
Yeah.
I've done it many times.
Yeah. No, birds are amazing. And a lot of people think of birds as not being intelligent as well. But, when we look at certain species or families of birds, they're remarkably intelligent. So just because it's a bird Doesn't mean that it's stupid. Look at crows and magpies and jays, for example. They say that, American crows have the intelligence of a 2.5-year-old human baby. And they can also recognize different human faces. So if I've gone in and shot at a parliament of crows, which is the collective noun for crows, if I've gone and shot into a tree of parliament of crows, those crows will remember my face. And next time I come there, they will fly off, and they won't do it for any other human. They've done tests on them as well. They're very intelligent. Yeah.
Do you find that animals and birds have a more highly evolved sensitivity than humans do, telepathically speaking, just sensitivity?
Yeah, I think definitely, not all, but I think definitely with what we call wildlife that exhibit self-awareness. So there's only a few groups of animals that exhibit self-awareness, and that are cetaceans, whales and dolphins, which are cetaceans. The higher primates, so that is gorillas, orangutans, bonobos, chimpanzees, ourselves, and elephants. So those are the only groups of animals that exhibit self-awareness. And the way that we test for that is we'll paint a pink dot on someone's forehead or an animal's forehead. And if you do that to a dolphin, for example, you paint a pink dot and you show it a mirror underwater, it'll try and wipe that pink dot off its face. If you show it to an elephant and you show it a mirror, it'll go up to that pink dot and it'll take its trunk and it'll wipe it. Now, if you do that to a baboon, which we all regard as being very intelligent, and you show it a mirror, it'll charge it, think it's another animal. It won't realize that it's itself. And so that's where the empathy, the ability to mourn, grieve, that's where I believe it comes into animals, is sort of the higher classes of animals. For example, next time you see elephants drinking at a watering hole, you might think that, yes, they're probably thirsty, but there's probably a couple of them going, I look really good today, and they're looking at themselves in the mirror, just like we do. So, yeah. So I think there's a lot of wildlife that definitely shows empathy. I wouldn't say necessarily more so than us, but I think,
Dogs, we don't understand dogs' language, but they understand us.
Right, 100%.
Fish, they have this tropistic behavior. They're going in one direction, and within a split second, they'll all turn.
Right.
Change.
Right, and then there's lots of intelligence in the animal world which we don't possess at all, which is remarkable intelligence. No, you even look at the smaller animals, like let's talk about termites and bees, for example, with their collective intelligence, where you've got a hive of bees or a termite mound or an ant colony all functioning as one organism, but each particular member doing a different thing. A drone being responsible for building, a soldier responsible for the protection of the hides. It's like the white blood cells in our body. Then you've got the brain and the heart of the whole organization, which is the queen. So you have lots of different types of intelligence in wildlife, and I think we underestimate it sometimes, just how incredible it is. Yeah.
Thank you so much, James.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.